welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black, and my co-host, Cole Miller. This is technically part 2 in terms of the podcast we're recording this week, although in reality, it's probably going to be part 1 because we want to get this episode out as soon as possible before too much of the NBA playoffs, the first round, has actually started. This is our first round playoff preview. We're going to go through all 8 series to the best of our ability and kind of just give you a basis on some of the matchups, some of the different things you'll be expecting from these teams on both ends of the floor. And of course, we'll give our series predictions. Just a very quick hit and primer kind of episode just to get everybody thinking about the playoffs and everybody in a good mood, because I'm certainly excited. I think we have a number of good first round series here. So, Cole, are you ready to dive into some of these matchups?
Absolutely.
So let's start it off in the Eastern Conference with our hometown Philadelphia 76ers being able to go up against the Washington Wizards, who are, it's funny, Kevin said to us as a hot take, he thought that the Wizards were going to win by 30, and he was pretty damn dead on the nose with that one. As that game was a blowout through and through. They just hung as many points as possible on the Indiana Pacers. So the Wizards kind of looked like the team I thought we expected to see against Boston the other night. And so that's more of the team that I'm expecting to face Philadelphia. This absolute dynamo offensive tandem between Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, able to score in a variety of ways. And they're not necessarily going to be stopped by anybody in particular on the Sixers, but you would expect the combination of Ben Simmons, Danny Green, Matisse Thybulle to be able to do some damage on those two, as well as some of the other players for the Wizards. I think an interesting player to take note of, who's had a little bit of a coming out party over the last few days, has been Rui Hachimora, the 6'8" combo forward for the Wizards, albeit he did get in foul trouble in that game against Boston, but he still had a pretty decent performance, and he certainly had an efficient night against Indiana. He's really coming into his own, was always known to be like this mid-range scorer, threat and transition at his size, not like a lockdown defender, but certainly long and athletic enough that he can give some other forwards problems in particular. And I'll be really curious to see how well he can play Tobias Harris defensively, and in turn, if Tobias Harris is able to limit what Rui can do around the basket offensively, whether that's in the post or kind of in those mid-range situations. So besides the classic Ben Simmons, Danny Green, and Thybulle versus the Washington perimeter duo, I'm really curious to see what happens in that forward spot. And obviously, Joel Embiid's going to be the two-way monster that he's been all year, the potential MVP candidate. Probably would have been the MVP if he didn't miss as many games. But Cole, what are some of the things that you're looking at in this series, and give us your series prediction? I think Kevin's actually picking the Sixers in a sweep. I'm going to take the Sixers in a gentleman's sweep. Well, what are your thoughts and some of the things you're looking for in this series?
Yeah, I'm going to go with you on the gentleman's sweep here. I just think that Beal and Westbrook are bound to get off for one game, and they'll probably get enough help from their other teammates there to get won by the Sixers, just because as Sixers fans, we've seen the Sixers get annihilated on the perimeter by Beal for the last several years here. And during the season, I'll definitely be thinking about, man, I wish we had Bradley Beal on this team, because that would make things a lot easier for the Philadelphia 76ers. I'll be interested as well to see Rui versus Tobias. I think that's a very good matchup for Rui to learn. I think Tobias needs to eat his lunch if the Sixers are the team who we think they are. And it's going to be a learning experience for the Wizards at young players like Rui Hachimora in that regard. I think he's going to struggle a little bit and find out what he needs to do in the offseason to get better. And I think that's going to be something fun for us to learn about Rui as well. If he comes out and gets 18 a game this series like he did against Indiana, yeah, maybe there's something here. But I really don't see that happening. I think the Sixers are going to be locked in. The Wizards have been playing their asses off for about 3 weeks straight. They could be getting a little tired at some point, I would imagine. And so I think that could catch up to them at some point against this team. And I think the Sixers I could see them sweeping like Kevin has.
Yeah, so could I. And the main reason behind that is that offensively, Philly just has so many different ways that they can hurt a team. like the Wizards. Kind of going through some of these numbers here that I was able to put together. All of these rankings are based on synergy stats for the season and their rankings by points per possession. The Sixers were second in post ups, sixth in handoffs, seventh in isolations, 13 in scoring out of pick and rolls with the ball handler. They were ninth in jump shots and 11 in catch and shoot. All of those play types I just listed off, the Wizards are not good at defending any of those play types whatsoever. So clearly, Embiid's going to have his way in the post and be able to generate offense efficiently that way. He's gotten really good, much better in the two-man game. I think that was one of the things preseason that we were looking at was could he establish a two-man game with somebody like Seth Curry in the same way that he established a relationship like that with JJ Redick. That's clearly been a success this season. So between some of those handoff situations with Seth Curry and Danny Green, being able to shoot the lights out with Ben Simmons, obviously being the best playmaker for others in terms of getting guys open looks for 3-point shots, them excelling in the catch and shoot game. I just don't think the Wizards can do enough being the 20th ranked defense in the league in points by possession. I just don't think they have enough juice to be able to stop what the 76ers want to do offensively. And then, yeah, Philly being the first team overall in total defense, points by possession. We saw that bear itself out all year long. They're a menacing defense, two potential defensive player of the year candidates. You could argue really any season in Simmons and Embiid, along with some of those other perimeter defenders that we mentioned. Yeah, this is an easy gentleman's sweep. Not too much time that we necessarily need to spend on that one. The other series in the East that we really don't need to spend a lot of time on is Brooklyn against Boston. I have the Nets winning pretty convincingly in 5 games. I think Kevin has the Nets winning in 6 games. And like I said, this is really easy. The Nets first in total offense, points by possession. You just look at everything that they're good at. It's really impressive when you actually look category by category. They were first in post ups. They were second in spot ups and handoffs, third in transition and offensive rebounds, fourth generating points out of romance and pick and roll situations. First in isolations and post ups, including passes. A lot of that comes from the addition of James Harden, being able to pick apart defenses by will and make things happen, whether it's out of pick and roll or him kind of doing his dribble dance at the top of the key, and whether he's bombing a three or getting a step on somebody. He's just such a maestro with the ball in his hands. The same goes for Kyrie Irving, of course. But some of the other weapons they have around them, Joe Harris, Jeff Green, these are guys who can be potentially prolific 3-point shooters if they get hot enough. So I just think the Nets have way too many weapons for Boston to be able to contain. And they do so many things well. Again, it's about a diversity in their offensive attack. It's not that the Nets just do one or 2 things well as a collective team, not necessarily even taking into account the fact that they have 3 superstars generating offense for them at different points or on the court even at the same time, which is something we're going to get to see in the playoffs. Finally, we didn't really get that in the regular season, but it's just the number of things they can do. Do you have anything else to add regarding the Nets Celtics series, Cole? Is there anything that could give you just a slight amount of optimism for Boston that they can maybe steal a game or 2?
No, I got the Nets in 4 here. I think this is over real quick, and I just want to highlight some of the stats you pulled out and put them against the Nets and Celtics real quick. Nets offense, second in spot ups, second in jump shots, and third in catch and shoot. Celtics defense, 24th in spot ups, 23rd in jump shots, 24th in catch. This is going to be over real quick. Nets are going to shoot the lights out against this team. Jaylen Brown's not on the floor. They don't have a chance. Let's move on.
And certainly we'll move on to the more divisive series among us because Kevin is our Heat's fan on the team, and God bless him, the Miami Heat have certainly been a joy to watch these last few years with the collection of talent that they've put together. Jimmy Bam, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn. They have so many different guys who can contribute at any point during a game, and once again they find themselves matched up with the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this is going to be a different series with what I think is going to be a different outcome, although it wouldn't surprise me if Miami was still able to come out with a win in this series. But for the Bucks being known as this defensive juggernaut over the last few years, they've completely flipped. Now, if anything, they've been much more focused on the offensive end, and they've slipped in some defensive categories that the Nets could potentially take advantage of. For example, the Bucks are not as good defending in isolation situations when there's passing involved, when the ball's whipping around the court. They're also not the best defending jump shots and catch and shoot looks. So when you're talking about a Miami Heat team with guys who can get as hot as anybody from the perimeter, and Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, or on that same notion, if they don't respect Jimmy Butler and all of a sudden Jimmy has one of those games where he's canning like 2 or 3 threes on top of everything else that he's doing, scoring inside the arc, getting others involved for that team, and obviously playing the stellar defense that he can from the point of attack, or guard the other team's best player, whether he has to be matched up on somebody like Giannis, or if Drew Holiday gets hot, he has to contain him, or if Chris Middleton gets hot, Jimmy can guard any of those guys. And obviously, Bam Adebayo is probably one of the best defensive weapons that anybody can have in the league to go up against Giannis. But on that same end, I mentioned that Milwaukee was so focused on their production offensively. Third out of isolation sets, including passes. Fourth in jump shots. They're ranked eighth around the basket and fifth in catch and shoot situations. So again, they have so many different ways that they can hurt you. And I think this is probably the best supporting cast of shooters that Giannis has been surrounded with up to this point. So if he looks to get downhill and get people involved passing out of the lane, he's got guys like Drew Holiday, as we mentioned, was a new addition to the team this year and played incredibly well for them all year long. Dante DiVincenzo has just continued to get better and better. That's one of our guys, Cole, being from Villanova. They just have more guys that can hurt you. Pat Connaughton has kind of still been a decent catch and shoot threat for them. Like, that's why I think the Bucks are ultimately going to win this series, but it's going to be a hard fought series. I don't think it's going to be the defensive battle that we've seen from these two teams in the past. I think it's going to be a more high scoring affair, and it's going to be about which team gets hot at the right times. And just given what we've seen from Milwaukee this year, having that chip on their shoulder that they're going up against a team that they have been able to beat in the playoffs consistently, I think that's going to be enough motivation for them, and Giannis in particular, to really come out, dominate wherever they can, and ultimately pull out a close one. What are your thoughts on the Heat Bucks series, Cole, before I kick it over to Kevin and let him give some of his thoughts?
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a juggernaut series. It wouldn't shock me if the Heat pull it out, but I definitely think the Bucks have the edge this year, mainly due to the Drew Holiday acquisition. They made that acquisition for this time of year, and I think it's going to pay off for them. He makes a huge difference in the playoffs. He can lock up a team's best perimeter player, and he can also get his. And that takes the weight off Chris Middleton's shoulders to do the same thing at not a maximum rate as he used to do. So he'll have his legs later in the game if he needs to get the shot off, or if Drew needs to get the shot off. I really think that's going to help them, especially with Dante starting to come into his own. I think he's the X factor. If Dante is able to chip in 14 to 16 a game, really find his three-point stroke consistently, and be able to spot up as Drew and Chris and Giannis are driving the hoop, that's going to make it all the easier for the Bucks. And I think that's what we see out of Dante. He's shown that he's a big game player before, and I really think that's what makes the difference this year for the Bucks is Dante and Drew. Last time we saw Drew in the first round of a playoff series, he averaged 28 points a game and almost 7 assists. So the dude can ball in the playoffs. I think we're underestimating and kind of forgetting what he was able to do.
Nothing would make me happier than to have a Dante DiVincenzo true coming out party in the NBA, in a series like this, or potentially later in the playoffs if the Bucks are able to advance. Kevin, I know you're going to pick the Heat, but give us your thoughts. What have you kind of seen from the team in the games that you've been able to see this season? What gives you the optimism that they can potentially replicate a kind of a run like they went on last year?
I think the big X factor is going to be Hero at the end of the day. He's had a kind of an off season. Like, he's had a sophomore slump. It is what it is. But if you look at his stats from like the last 10 games, so for the overall season, he shot 36% from three, which is acceptable, but it's not great. But last 10, he's shot 48.6%. So he's kind of started to pick it up as the season progressed. So I'm looking at Tyler Hero moving the ball well, which he has been over the last 10 games, and shooting the ball better over the last 10 games. And yeah, Drew Holiday is a lockdown defender. I'm not saying that he's not by any account, right? But I think the Heat just have too many shooters at the end of the day. I think it's going to be a 7-game series, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks won at all. But I just think the Heat have so many weapons, and some of them are just starting to click finally.
Yeah, that is one of the Bucks' downfalls, and that comes back to the defensive philosophy that they've taken the last few years. They've wanted to be a team that protects the paint first and foremost, and you'll see them like I can recall multiple games that they've played Philadelphia, for example, and they just leave guys wide open from three, and sometimes they don't even bother to close out on the perimeter, and that's really been a thorn in their side because you can't do that against a team like Miami. Like Duncan Robinson is such a unique shooter because you give him like a centimeter to be able to get that shot off, and he can make a look from virtually anywhere on the court. And you mentioned Tyler Hero being an X factor. I absolutely agree. He can get irrationally hot from anywhere, as I alluded to previously. So it's really going to be about Milwaukee showing the willingness to contest a lot of those 3-point shots and not letting Miami have the open looks to get so irrationally hot from the perimeter. Now, I think Cole brings up a great point defensively that Drew doesn't let guys have easy offense, right? If Drew's in the vicinity to make a play happen or make a defensive stop, he's going to put forth the effort to do so. So, regardless of who he ends up spending the most amount of time on, I think between their perimeter guys, he's probably still going to guard Jimmy the most, and it's probably going to be Middleton taking on one of those two other shooters. But if Drew switches on to one of those guys, whether it be Hero or Robinson, if one of those guys starts to make a few shots, Holiday's not going to be someone to just stand by and not try and close out on one of those guys and make them do something else with the ball. So, yeah, it's about some of the different guys and potentially different strategies that Milwaukee may choose to deploy this year that can change the series. So I'm confident that will happen. That's why I'm going to pick the Bucks in 7. But this is going to be one hell of a series, and I can't wait to watch every single game, as I'm excited to with all these playoff series. But that one in particular, I think we can all agree that's probably going to be the best first round matchup in the Eastern Conference. Moving on past that one, our last first round series in the East, we have the Knicks against the Hawks. Now, I was listening earlier today to Zach Lowe's podcast with David Thorpe. If you guys haven't listened to that one, by the time you're listening to ours, you're doing yourself a disservice. Please go and listen to that podcast. But they were talking about the series and how ESPN had a lot of insiders and writers. They had 18 different people pick these first round playoff series, and 15 out of 18 of them chose the Knicks. Only 3, one of them being Zach Lowe, chose the Hawks. And Coach Thorpe actually went on Zach's podcast and picked the Hawks because they both just think Atlanta's the more talented team, both offensively and defensively. Now, I would disagree, particularly defensively. I think the Knicks, it's not necessarily that they have Thibodeau there, and obviously there's been a culture change, but I just think in this first round of the playoffs, I know for a fact that the Knicks came out on social media and they announced that their first few home games are completely sold out, max capacity as much as it can be in these times as we're recovering from the COVID pandemic. About 15,000 fans in the building. You know damn well that those fans are going to be as loud as can be. And that's going to be an environment. Not only has Trae Young and some of those younger Atlanta Hawks players not been in a playoff series, they certainly have not been in a playoff series like how it's going to be in New York when they have to go on the road to the Garden in an environment that's been starved for any kind of basketball success from the Knicks. I just think that environment at the end of the day is going to be too tough for those Atlanta Hawks players to overcome, especially with the defensive intensity, with Randall being the force that he is, with the size that they have on the perimeter, with guys like Elfrid Payton, RJ Barrett, Reggie Bullock. I mean, these are not small guys. Like these are guys who are all like 6'5", 6'6", and above. And Randall obviously being the big guy that he is to kind of swallow up some of those smaller or not necessarily smaller in the case of Herter and Bogdanovich, but more slender offensive playmakers. I really think if the Atlanta Hawks are going to make noise in this series and they're going to steal a few games or potentially even win it, they're going to have to take advantage of the fact that the main area of weakness for the Knicks defensively is they don't guard well in pick and roll sets. And Trae Young and Clint Capella have been the best, or well, one of the best, I should say, if not the best pick and roll duo in the entire NBA. Trae Young obviously being a savant passer, him being able to stretch the defense on some of those screen sets. If Clint Capella sets the right screen at the right angle, and you give Trae Young an inch of space, he's going to have that quick trigger. He's going to want to get that shot off. And if Trae Young gets hot, if the Knicks let him get irrationally hot and he's able to put up like 35, 40 points a game in a playoff series, then I guess at that point, all bets are off, right? So it's really going to come down to how the Knicks scheme against Trae Young specifically, how they're able to limit those pick and roll, easy finish opportunities from Capella at the rim, as well as some of their other guys, and what they're able to do in that part of the offense specifically. How can the Knicks contain Trae Young's pick and roll attack? So I'm going to take the Knicks in 6 to win this series. I'm going to agree with the majority of those ESPN staffers, but like I said, there is a blueprint for the Hawks to be able to make some noise and potentially even win the series. Cole, where are you at, Knicks Hawks? Why are you making the selection that you are? What do you kind of see from what can happen in this series?
Yeah, so I'm taking the Knicks in 5, like Kevin is. I just, not always does it matter if when these teams meet in the regular season, what the regular season record is when you come to playoff time, but I think it does here. And the Knicks won every matchup this year pretty handily, except for one overtime matchup. I just think that is born out of they're the tougher team. They can be more physical with the Hawks, and come playoff time, it's more physical basketball already. So I think they're just going to boss this team around a little bit. And I just like what they're bringing off the bench a little bit better than what the Hawks are bringing off the bench as well. Derrick Rose is playing really well right now. Quickly's had some nice moments, and against the Hawks, Quickly will still be able to produce pretty well. I think neither team is super deep, so whichever gets to move on, I think that's going to be a quick out in the second round, because you're looking at 6 or 7 man rotations, and that's just not going to hold up. These guys are going to get tired eventually. But like I said, Knicks in 5.
Well, that's kind of what we've seen from Thibodeau coach teams, is that for some of these other teams coming in regular season into the playoffs, sure, everyone tightens up a rotation at some point, but Tibbs has a tight rotation all year round, right? So these guys are playing crazy minutes, and that's kind of been, you can win a bunch of games. You could win 45 to 50 games in the regular season playing with a tight rotation and leaning on your best players to make plays consistently, especially if they remain healthy through the regular season. But when you get to the playoffs and you deal with with all of what comes along as far as the conditioning aspect, how ready are these guys to come out and perform in even tougher defensive situations than what they faced in the regular season? Like we've already seen with some of these playing games, like the defensive intensity has ratcheted up in a few of them. Sure, we've had a few blowouts, but especially in like that Warriors-Lakers game, you could tell that like everybody's going to come into this first round. The playoffs are just a different beast defensively. Yeah. So that's why I'm so intrigued to see if Trae Young can have like a coming out party in the playoffs and establish himself as this true star level guard. I know he's been an all-star, but he's had certain points, and even the Atlanta Hawks have had certain points of success where he hasn't been on the floor for it. And it's kind of been more about, especially what Nate McMillan's been able to come in and do in his short time with the team, and kind of turn some things around for them on both ends of the floor. So I just question how much of a factor is Trae Young going to be. And if he's better than what the Knicks bring defensively, then they have a shot. But I'm just not confident that they're going to be able to figure everything out, and that the Knicks aren't going to be able to bring that second ranked defense in terms of points per possession from the regular season into the postseason and grind out games here in the first round. I agree. I think it's going to be like a 5 or 6 game series. I'll give the Hawks 2 games because I just think that Trae Young can just get hot, put up like 40 points in 2 games and carry them to a few wins, especially against a team like the Knicks, who are 21st in total offense. They can absolutely get cold from the perimeter too. And if Julius Randle and RJ Barrett aren't able to get into the lane consistently, finish around the basket at a high level, their offense can struggle at times too. So I'll give the Hawks a few games, but nothing really exciting for me to point out in that series. And I think we can comfortably move on to the West here, where it really does start to get exciting. You have the Utah Jazz going up against the winner of tonight's play-in game. We're recording this on Friday the 21st, between the Golden State Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies. I think the Warriors are going to win that game. I think the Warriors are going to be the 8th seed. I don't necessarily think anybody else has any other opinions, unless Cole. Who are you picking for the play-in game? Do you have the Warriors as well?
I do. I know it's a revenge game real soon for for the Grizzlies, but I still think the Warriors, Steph is just playing at an unbelievable rate. He's by far the best player on the court.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that Steph lets them lose that game and not let that team get to the playoffs. And they've been hot. They almost beat the Lakers in the other night. That was a thrilling game. People have talked about Andrew Wiggins has stepped up for that team as well. I've been really impressed with what he's done over the last few weeks. As someone who once was a really big Andrew Wiggins believer, it's nice to see him be able to contribute to real winning basketball in the capacity like he is. But with that being said, they're going up against what was a regular season juggernaut this year, with Utah winning 52 out of 72 possible games. An overwhelming offensive attack, second in pick and roll offense from the ball handler, third in spot ups as well as pick and roll offense, points scored by the roll man, fifth in offensive rebounds and putbacks, as you can kind of imagine. Gobert is a relentless rebounder on the glass, along with Derek Favors when he's been able to come off the bench and give them good minutes as well. Some of their other front court guys are able to contribute to rebounding, like Joe Ingles. So you know that Utah is going to be able to score in a variety of ways. Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell are going to be able to operate pick and roll offense incredibly well. They're going to pick the Golden State Warriors apart. They're going to get open jump shots, and they're going to put points on the board. But the other thing that I really noticed when I was pulling some of these numbers is that Utah, just by what they were able to do in the regular season, and I know that, like we just said, the playoffs are a different animal, but they were so overwhelmingly good defensively as well. And obviously a lot of that comes from Gobert manning the paint, not just blocking shots, but changing shots at so many different angles and being the presence that he is. Donovan Mitchell, while not being an all-world defender on the perimeter, at least being very competitive, very feisty. Mike Conley, bringing a veteran presence to that backcourt that he wasn't himself last year, but he's certainly been himself this year, and that's also been a big reason why they've been able to win so many games. So while Steph has been irrationally hot, you know that he's probably going to give him like 35 to 40 points a game, something absolutely absurd in this series. I just don't think he has enough around him to be able to pick apart a team like the Utah Jazz. I think this is going to be a gentleman's sweep. I have the Jazz in 5. I think Kevin has the Jazz in 6. The only thing that I will give to Golden State is that they are Steph Curry and Draymond Green are so smart. They know how to pick apart teams, doing the little things in handoff actions, having Steph particularly run off screens, getting him involved in the pick and roll game with Draymond, having Draymond do everything that he can do out of the short roll, giving another team just so many different looks offensively and operating off of pure motion. I think the Jazz are going to be well coached. I don't think Quinn Snyder's going to be caught off guard by anything that Golden State does. But if you're going up against two guys as intelligent and witty as Steph and Draymond, you do have to be prepared for quite literally anything on the court, and you have to bring your A game. I think the Jazz will, but if the Jazz are off in a few games and you give Steph Curry the light of day to winning this series, like if you don't finish out Golden State in 5 games, you give him a game 6, I can see Steph just completely going off and being Superman, forcing a game 7. And if you're in a game 7 against Steph and Draymond, I mean, you have to think that it's not, the Jazz aren't going to be an overwhelming favorite at that point, even though the game's going to be in Utah. So there are some interesting wrinkles that bring different dimensions to this series, but I think the Jazz are going to be focused to get the job done and move on. What are your thoughts, Cole?
I'm with you. I think it's easy to fall into like, ooh, the Warriors and Steph Curry's playing so well right now. Like they had regular season success against the Jazz. Maybe they could pull it off, but the Jazz are where they are for a reason, and they maintain that spot without Donovan Mitchell for a good stretch down the rest of the season. So I think the Warriors are going to get a game. I think that's mainly because Donovan Mitchell is easing himself back in right now. But this team has a lot of weapons, like you pointed out. I think they're all clicking. They've been playing well all season together. Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench, easily the 6th man of the year in my book. They're getting good contributions out of guys like Royce O'Neal and Georges Niang. I think they're going to be great role players for them all playoffs long. I think it deserves to be mentioned that the Jazz, outside of Donovan Mitchell, all these guys are like 26 to 33. Like that's the perfect age for a playoff team. And they're not going to be pushed around by anybody, and they've been kind of embarrassed the last couple of years, I think, in their mind. So I think like you said, they're going to be coming in razor focused. They're going to kick the Warriors to the curb, and they're going to show everybody out west that they mean business this year.
Absolutely. So Utah winning that series, I think, pretty handily. Cole and I are in agreement. Kevin's also in lockstep somewhat. He has the Jazz in 6. So he's actually going to give the Warriors another game, which, like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if the Warriors pushed it to 6, pushed it or 7. Steph and Draymond can be that good, but where you're really betting against the odds going up against a team who's been so dominant on both ends of the floor. So
I just don't think the Warriors have enough other guys to make enough shots.
And that's it too. Like is Jordan Poole going to be like this amazing 40% plus 3-point shooter in playoff situations when he's still pretty young of the teeth? Or guys like Michael Mulder going to be able to step up consistently? Is Andrew Wiggins going to stay as hot as he's been? Like, there's just so many question marks with Golden State that we don't know the answers to. We may find out some surprising answers. Who knows? But I just think Utah is coming in focused. They have one of the best coaches in the league. They have a veteran trio in Conley, Donovan Mitchell, and Rudy Gobert, who aren't going to mess around. They're going to come out full force both ends of the floor. And yeah, they'll get the job done.
Do you want me to tell you why I think that Golden State's going to get 2 wins?
Yeah, please.
I think Steph is going to drop 60 points at least one time in the series.
Wow.
I think he's going to just take over everything.
Can we get you to like make a prop bet? Like, can we get FanDuel to like get us to let Kevin make like a prop bet?
Yeah.
Steph Curry over under 59.5 in one game.
I could see that based off how Denver was able to let Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell were having like 40-point battles last year.
I just think it's gonna get to the point where we see Steph Curry just understand I'm the only person on this team that can like score efficiently, right? And he's gonna have like one of those like Dame games where Dame just takes every single shot, right? And Steph has the same qualities, if not better than Dame. I mean, if real argument, who's the better 3-point shooter, right? Who's saying Steph just doesn't pull up from the logo like 5 or 6 times and just make all of them, right? It's a distinct possibility.
I mean, I think that Steph has been the more consistent 3-point shooter throughout his tenure, but to your point, Kevin, and we can get into Dame Lillard when we talk about the Nuggets Blazers, but yeah, Dame's able to make every single type of 3-point shot that Steph is. Like, he has the ability to make those same shots. I do agree with that. So yeah, if Steph goes off for like 60 points in a game, I'd be really shocked if Golden State would lose that game. So yeah, that can be an X factor. That can absolutely give them an extra game. Moving on to the series that I'm the most excited for out of all of them, the Phoenix Suns against the Los Angeles Lakers. The Phoenix Suns winning 51 games this year for a franchise that's been an absolute, as Colin Cowherd likes to say, tire fire for so many years. Chris Paul comes in and everything just seems to click. And I don't want to put every single little ounce of success at the feet of Chris Paul, even though he's obviously had a big part in it. But I also think that Phoenix just had so many young pieces who have now gotten time to season and develop, and being better coached, having 2 years now under their belts with Monty Williams, having somebody like Chris Paul come in and be a coach for those guys on the floor. I just think that everyone's game has jumped a level, and now they honestly have one of if not the most complete team in the NBA, in my opinion. I truly think that this series could potentially determine the NBA Finals race, at least in the West, altogether. Like, I think the winner of this series, in my mind, is going to go to the NBA Finals. I'm going to pick the Lakers in 7 games. I don't say that lightly, but really 2 reasons. Number 1, I trust Anthony Davis and LeBron James when the chips are on the table to be able to get it done in isolation. And number 2, I also trust how good they've been throughout this season defensively to carry over. I think that Anthony Davis is going to give DeAndre Ayton as many fits as possible in the post. I don't think Ayton's going to get anything easy down low. And so that just puts more pressure on Phoenix's tandem of perimeter scorers in particular, and distributors, and Chris Paul and Devin Booker, to make everything happen outside of the painted area, as opposed to being able to get inside a lot easier. And those catch and shoot guys are also going to be looked at to produce in higher volume as well. Guys like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Jay Crowder, Dario Saric is absolutely going to have to step up for this team as well. And I guess my final concern, Chris Paul's had injuries in the postseason before. Not that I obviously want this to happen, or not that I'd wish it on him, but if it does, and the team has to go to Devin Booker being in charge of running the offense full time, which is not that he's not capable, but he's not the same level of playmaker as Chris Paul. And if they got to throw more minutes at Cameron Payne, who also doesn't have the same playoff seasoning as somebody like Chris Paul, like I just wonder, I really hope that doesn't become a factor, but that it has to be in the back of your mind when you're thinking about Chris Paul being active in any kind of postseason series. So those are really my three takeaways as far as why I think the Lakers are ultimately going to pull it out. The other thing I'll say, though, is that Phoenix has been really good at finding ways to accomplish the little things, backdoor teams, gets people running off screens at the right times. Monty Williams has done a great job, and Chris Paul for that matter, on the court in getting everybody involved in the right space at the right time. So if the Lakers get lazy on defense, if they get lazy around the basket, not necessarily containing Ayton, but they get lazy allowing cutters to just float through that painted area at all times, the Suns have the personnel to pick you apart and play that style of half-court game. So if the Lakers are careless and they don't play with that top 5 defensive intensity that they did in the regular season, I think they will. But if they don't, they're going to let the door open for Phoenix to not only win it even in like 7 games, but for Phoenix to potentially win it even quicker than that, which before I get to you, Cole, Kevin has Phoenix winning in 6. And I want to applaud him for that pick. I don't want to see LeBron bow out early, but damn, I really want to see this Phoenix Suns team as much as I possibly can this year. They've been that fun to watch. So, Kevin, why are you taking Phoenix in 6 games?
Watching the game, gosh, when was it? Last night, I guess? 2 nights ago?
2 nights ago, yeah.
There's something off with the Lakers this year. Maybe it's LeBron's health, which it probably is. Anthony Davis was just making really bad decisions. I don't know. Watching that game, and it may be recency bias, right? Like, it could have just been they're playing against Draymond Green, right? And he's an elite defender, one of the best ever. And maybe that's why everything looked like it was just crumbling. But I don't know. I just think they don't have it this year.
Well, the other aspect of that too is that is the Lakers, more often than people want to admit, they capitalize so well on other teams' mistakes. They get out in transition. They get easy baskets. They're not going to be able to do that against Phoenix. Like, Phoenix is not a team that's going to turn the ball over like 25, 30 times a game. They're going to limit turnovers, and they're going to force you to beat them in half-court sets much more often, especially in a playoff situation. You know that team's going to be well coached, and they're going to have it put together. So, the Lakers, to your point, Kevin, and I'll let you continue. Sorry I interrupted you, but they're not going to be able to just cakewalk through this series and capitalize on a shit ton of mistakes. Like, Phoenix is going to have their wits about them, and they're going to make the Lakers work for it.
Yeah, and if there's any player in the NBA who can truly be a LeBron counter in terms of just being as smart as him in terms of basketball IQ, it's probably Chris Paul, right?
Yep.
I mean, that guy is just elite. I mean, we got a chance to see him a few months ago at this point, right?
Yeah.
And even though he didn't have a great performance, you can just see just how well he sees the floor. That guy is just... I think he's due for something, and I could really see this team making a run to the finals. I don't know if they end up winning it all, because you're going to have tough competition in the East, whether it's Brooklyn coming out, whether it's Philly, or one of the other teams. It's going to be tough, but right now, I just really like Phoenix to make it all the way, because I think Chris Paul is extra motivated, and I don't want to be against an extra motivated Chris Paul. And just going back to the Lakers, too, it wouldn't surprise me if with LeBron's ankle, he doesn't even make it through the series, right? Like, he came back twice now, and he's re-aggravated it twice. It's just, it's super sketch.
By the way, but before we get into some of Cole's thoughts, the fact that Chris Paul did not make it third place in the MVP balloting. That really pisses me off. And I understand the season that Steph Curry had. I get that he's been incredible for like a month and a half. He had that scoring streak where he was absolutely bananas offensively, whether it was shooting the ball from three or just putting points on the board overall. But what Chris Paul has done for this team all year long, the fact that he can't be mentioned in the top three, I don't know. That just makes me really mad. Like, that man deserves so much credit for everything that's happened, for everything that happened in Oklahoma City last year, for everything that's happened in Phoenix this year. Like, damn, that really makes me mad. Like I probably wouldn't, like, if I had an MVP vote, honest to God, I would vote for Chris Paul. Like, he would be my MVP over Nikola Jokic. And I'm not saying that Nikola Jokic doesn't deserve to win the MVP award. That's not what I'm saying at all. The dude's had one of the best seasons we've ever seen from a center in terms of the versatility of his production. But just what Chris Paul has meant to this team, and hashtag team little guys. I've kind of become this guy who's just going to stand on the soapbox for the smaller guard at this point. When either scouting for the NBA or appreciating the NBA game at a high level, I'm siding with Chris Paul this year, and that's another reason why I want to see this team succeed. Give Chris Paul a chance to prove everybody wrong that maybe he should have really been among the three finalists for the MVP award. But Cole, I've literally been watching you type here, going back and forth in our Google Docs. Lakers, Phoenix, Lakers. I don't know. Let's figure it out together, man. What are your thoughts? What are your positives? What are your negatives? How can we talk this out and help you come to a conclusion on this series?
Yeah, so when we first scrolled down to do these two teams, I think I had Phoenix in there, and then I've, like you said, just been swapping back and forth. You guys have made some excellent points here, and this has just been a toss-up in my mind to begin with. But I think it's going to come down to health, youth, and age. That's kind of it, really. And I'm going to side with Kevin here. LeBron's ankle is not in the best shape. He's playing, but he's definitely not where he could be. And they're coming off an extremely long season last year. So, yeah, I think he's a little tired. I don't think they have the same desire this year either as they might have had last year. You know, they could see it at the bubble. It was, you know, everything was kind of like within reach when you're there. And they were able to pull the team together and get it done. I just don't think that's going to happen this year for the Lakers. The Suns are a young, exciting team who's very confident. You know, Devin Booker is ultra confident, and now he's got Chris Paul next to him. So, yeah, I think it's time Chris Paul makes his imprint again on the league. He did a long, long time ago, you know, when he was on the New Orleans Hornets. And I think he's going to make his mark this year. I think this is Chris Paul's year. Let's take this team to the finals. Yeah, he's got a bunch of guys who haven't really been there, but they've kind of been there in their own way. Like, Booker's carried this team for 4 years. Ayton, they just need him to do the little things and you know, show up when he can offensively when they're not expecting. Bridges, he's going to be they're going to be their lockdown defender, and Bridges has played in big moments in college, so I don't see him shrinking in the moment either. He could be very Iguodala-esque on LeBron, and with LeBron at 100%, I think Bridges has a good chance to do some, you know, damage defensively there. So for all those reasons, I think I'm going to go ahead and pick Phoenix. It's going to be a hell of a series.
Can I bring up an interesting stat real quick?
You always can, Kevin.
I was scrolling through the NBA Reddit earlier, and do you know Mikal Bridges is actually the clutchest shooter in the last minute for Phoenix too? I didn't realize he was that, like, efficient in the last minute of the game. I thought he was just, like, I knew he could shoot, right? But I thought he was just, like, an elite defender, right? But I don't know, Mikal Bridges is underrated. He's a really good player.
Mikal Bridges is a player. Yeah, no, he's a player. And Cole and I always thought that he was going to be a player. And that's why, like, Cole, not that I'm trying to hate on Zaire Smith by any means. I know that was your boy. But God, when Philly traded Mikal Bridges, I was heartbroken because I was like, damn, he was just perfect for the Sixers, and I'm so upset that they passed on him. Not necessarily, obviously, there's a lot that happened with Zaire Smith that nobody can control. But I just thought that Bridges would have been a dynamite player for him. I know it was kind of like blah, like, oh, of course, the Villanova kid, the Philly star stays in Philly, whatever. But I just really thought that would have been the best fit. Yeah.
Sometimes that makes sense. And yeah, it's definitely stings to see Bridges where he is right now and you know, see the Sixers as well as the 1 seed. We'd be that much better with him. But there's also other kids we could have taken in that draft that the Sixers, you know, Dante's in the playoffs right now, and Lonnie just got eliminated. And these are all guys that might have been a little bit better than Zaire for this.
Well, Dante too. You and I were high on Dante when people From some of our former coworkers didn't have Dante even as a first rounder. You and I were pretty much in that bandwagon that whole year. So sure, hats off to us, whatever. But the point is that the Villanova kids should have stayed in Philly. Period. They should have never been able to leave. Even Brunson, for that matter.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jalen Brunson too. Everybody was kind of high on him in the Philadelphia area. All those kids should have been able to stay home, or the Sixers should. God, the Sixers should have at least one of them. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. The point is,
Hart.
Josh Hart. Oh my God, Josh Hart especially. Yeah, too. Man, with some of the stuff that he does for New Orleans, Jesus, Lou. That being said, though, this is a pro Phoenix Suns podcast. I'm gonna stick with my pick, Lakers in 7, but I could see this going either way. And if Phoenix moves on, I am by no means gonna be upset. And yeah, if Phoenix is able to beat the Lakers in this series, I'm picking them to go to the finals. Hell, I might even pick them to win the finals. I just think they're that good of a team. They're like 1 through 9, I think, can compete with anybody. So that's going to be a really fascinating series to watch. Moving on to a series that some people could say is fascinating. I got to be honest, I don't think it's that fascinating. Nuggets, Blazers. The Blazers were horrifically bad this year on defense. They were 29th in total defense in terms of points per possession. And you look at every single category, the only category where they were top 10 in terms of points per possession from the stats that I was able to pull, they were 8th in transition. You know who doesn't give a shit about playing in transition? The Denver Nuggets. Because of Nikola Jokic pretty much manning the point for that team now for I guess I was going to say for better or worse, but no, it is for the better. And shout out to Jamal Murray. We hope that you get healthy. Obviously, they're without him for this playoff run, but even without him, every single offensive, it's not like the Denver Nuggets are a bad team on offense already. They were 7th in total offense this year, but every single statistical category that they rate out well on offense, it's like Portland is like bottom of the barrel in terms of being able to defend against those categories. Like everything that you'd expect Jokic to be able to take advantage of, offensive rebound opportunities, post-ups, including passes, operating out of the pick and roll game. And then you factor in some of their catch and shoot guys like Michael Porter, for example, I think is going to have a really good series. The team being 8th in jumpers, 8th in catch and shoot. Porter's obviously a big reason for that when he gets his minutes and he gets his opportunities. I just think given what the Nuggets do well and what the Blazers don't do well in a high scoring affair, it's going to come down to Denver ultimately winning this series. I like them to win this in 5 games. And that hurts me to say because I'm one of the biggest Damian Lillard fans you could possibly find. I really think that he's up there. He can have any day where he plays like the best point guard in the league. We were talking earlier about him potentially being able to go toe-to-toe with Stephen Curry as a shooter. I give the edge to Steph, but like I said, Dame can make every single 3-point shot in the book that Steph can. I just don't know about the volume. But then again, I could be wrong about that because when you do look at like the statistics in terms of where he's shooting the ball from, like when you're shooting out by the logo, Dame's technically is like the best shooter by percentage in the league. So as prolific as him and CJ McCollum can be, as many points as the Blazers can score, I just don't think they're going to be able to outscore Denver just given the statistical disparities between categories and what each team excels at. Cole, what are your thoughts on Nuggets Blazers? What are you going with? Do you see any way that Portland can flip the series around and steal a couple games or even win it besides just Dame and CJ just being blistering hot for however many games?
No, if I have the Nuggets in 6, and if the Blazers are going to win too, it's going to be on the back of Dame and CJ. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I just think the Nuggets have too much firepower, and perhaps out of any other young player in all the playoffs, I think Michael Porter Jr. could have like the biggest holy shit, like this guy is a superstar type, production for the first few series as long as Denver's in the playoffs. So I'm looking forward to seeing him really kind of, bust out against Portland, a team who doesn't play a lot of defense, like you said, if any defense actually. So no, I think this will be Nuggets all the way, and it'll be pretty quick. Portland's one of my teams, and I'm kind of like, yeah, they're back in the playoffs, and yeah, they had a decent little season again, but there's just something wrong. Dame and CJ, they've been at this for several years now, and they can't seem to break through the ceiling that they have, and so something's got to change there. And I think there's another team in the playoffs that's kind of headed for that change as well. We're about to get into the Dallas Mavericks, but yeah, I just think Portland. I think this is going to be a quick out for Portland, quicker than I have listed here, and I think it's going to be a lot of questions for them in the offseason.
Kevin, do you have any thoughts to add to this? Because you actually picked Nuggets in 7. You think that this is going to go 7 games? Is that just because of your belief, like you alluded to, in Damian Lillard to put this team on his back for 3 and carry them to 3 wins?
Yeah, I think a lot of my talking points are very similar to the same thing with Steph Curry. I just think Dame's gonna kind of step up because he always does, right? Dame is built for the playoffs, but the Portland team is just not nearly as good as Denver. I don't know. Just same thing. Just Dame's gonna go off. I don't know if he's gonna go for 60, but he's gonna have a few really high scoring games where they're just gonna win because he's just putting up too many points for Denver to stop them. And I just think Denver is gonna be missing Jamal Murray a lot. I mean, Jamal Murray is an elite player. I mean, look what he did for them last year, right? In the playoffs, it's just rough without him.
He did carry that team at times, but if Jokic is going to validate his MVP coronation, I think I'd be stunned if he didn't win the MVP at this point. What better way than to cement that MVP season than to start off a playoff run with blowing the doors off of somebody like Portland, who by all metrics accountable, like, you should be able to blow this team out, no problem, even without Jamal Murray. I think they are going to miss Jamal Murray as they move on to the second round, potentially even past that. But I think here they have enough talent on that team. Make shots, defend enough. Don't let Nurkic have his way down low. As long as Jokic can win that battle down low between friendly rivals, and not let Nurkic go off for like 25 and 15 every night, then I really think that Denver should be able to win that series pretty handily.
The one thing I will say, though, is that even though I am picking Denver to win this, I think it's far more likely that if there's going to be like a sweep or a 5-game series, I think it's much more likely Portland wins in 4 or 5 than Denver wins in 4 or 5. I don't see Portland not winning at least 2 games in the series. I just don't see how it happens.
Hey, man, Dame Dollar is Dame Dollar for a reason. Like if that man's gonna have his way and he's just gonna put that team on his back and he's gonna make every single clutch shot possible towards the end of games and he's gonna pull every tight game out of his ass, like, fine, like so be it. Like it wouldn't shock me, obviously, in the slightest, but just by team composition, everything that both clubs are bringing to the table, I just think that this is Denver's series to lose, and I think that they're gonna hammer it home and they're gonna move on.
My only retort.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my only retort to that is, like, didn't Portland have a much better team in 2018, and they got swept by the Pelicans? And I know the Pelicans were a weird case that year with Boogie, AD, Drew. That was a nice combo, but still, like, to get swept is something.
Well, in theory, Portland has the best offensive team that I think they've ever had around Dame and CJ. Because you look at that starting unit, you have Nurkic at the center spot, being able to score in a variety of ways, whether that's in the post. He's even made some jump shots at times this season. Then you bring in Norm Powell, who was already having a great year in Toronto. I wasn't a big fan of them giving up Gary Trent to do it, but at the same time, Powell's been really good for Portland and a big reason why they've been able to swing their season around a little bit here the last month and a half. And then you got Rocco, who can certainly make an open 3 whenever he's given one. So this is technically their best offensive team. The problem is just being that horrific on defense. Like, how often do you see a team who's that bad through the regular season on defense actually win a playoff series or even multiple playoff series? Like, it just doesn't happen. So that's probably the biggest reason why. If they were even like middle of the pack defensively, let's say they were like between, like, I don't know, 16th and 19th or even 20th defensively, like, they weren't like god awful, but they were kind of just like middle of the road to like the back end of the top 66% of the league. Like, I thought that I would give them a much better shot then in that scenario, but the fact that they're just so bad, like, I just don't see how they can overcome that against an offensive machine like Jokic. And yeah, Cole, I agree with you. I think this really could be Porter's moment to say that I'm here, I'm ready for this. Just because Jamal Murray isn't here doesn't mean that we're just going to fold over and roll over to anybody in this Western Conference playoff run. I can be a second banana. I can take my lumps and I can help Jokic get some wins here. So yeah, this really is a big time for Porter Jr. Cole, you just talked about you brought up the Dallas Mavericks. They're playing the Clippers. I've started off every single conversation here, but now you have me really intrigued. When you're talking about Dallas might have to make some wholesale changes. I'm assuming that's why the biggest reason why you have Clippers in 5. I also have the Clips in 5. But why don't you kind of expound upon what you see from this series and why you think that Dallas is at such a disadvantage to the Clippers?
I just thought it was a weird season for Dallas all around. I felt like Luka he got off to a slow start, whatever reason that was. I'm not really sure. Kristaps wasn't around off and on for large chunks of the season. Again, that definitely doesn't help Luka establish anything. I just felt like Luka is in year 3 with this team, and he's looking at the same guys, and he's like, I need something more from some of these guys, or I need another guy here. Like, this Kristaps isn't on the floor enough. And so I think that kind of got to him a little bit this year. And frustration standpoint, and I don't know, maybe he didn't play as focused as he could have every night. And so I think Dallas will see that again in the playoffs a little bit. Kristaps hasn't been himself all year. He's still, I don't think that knee is 100%. And he's probably had other ailments pop up as he tries to compensate and play through it. So I think the Clippers, feeling the heat of their unexpected early out last year, are going to come in sharp. Paul George and Kawhi aren't going to face much of a stiff competition from anybody on this Dallas Mavericks perimeter. I think they're going to eat all series long, and it's going to be quick. Luka will probably get off for a game. He's got that magic, and he is that good. So I can't rule him out for a game, but I think the Clippers win this pretty handedly.
Everybody seems to think, including Kevin, he's kind of actually aligned with the majority of the national media landscape. I think the majority are picking the Clippers to win. A lot of people are picking them to win in 6. You and I are ahead of that curve. We have the Clippers winning in 5. I think a lot of people think that Luka's good, not just for 1 game, but for 2 games because of the savant that he is. And it's so ironic that this series being the 4-5 matchup, this really is like the Knicks-Hawks of the West. And reason being is that I talked about the New York Knicks being bad defending in pick and roll situations, not being able to contain the roll man or letting the ball handler score too efficiently out of pick and roll sets or kind of find the corner shooter. Well, there's virtually no other player better doing that than Luka Doncic, and the Clippers also struggle to defend in those same play types. So if Luka decides to play otherworldly and absolutely carry this team, and the Clippers can't do anything to stop Dallas's pick and roll attack, then that could pose some problems. That could give Dallas that extra game and really make the Clippers work to win a game 6 or even possibly a game 7 if it would get pushed that far. But I just think, given what the Clippers have been able to do all year offensively, basically, as long as they're moving the ball, as long as they're not playing like this super heavy isolation heavy offense, and they're getting guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard being involved in getting other open shooters the ball. Now you bring in Rondo at the trade deadline. He's obviously going to do his best to get everybody involved and keep the ball moving and coach people into getting into the right spots at the right times. As long as that ball wasn't around, they're able to can shots and they're able to make shots a lot more efficiently. And Dallas is not a defensive juggernaut by any means. They're not as bad as Portland, but they were a team who was 19th in total defense. But just given where the Clippers finished, 3rd in total offense, the veteran talent that they have on that team, guys like Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Rajon Rondo, Reggie Jackson, Morris, they just have so many weapons who can make shots in a variety of ways. And I just think the Clippers offense is going to be much better than it was in the previous postseason. And I think that they're going to overwhelm a team on the poorer side of things like the Dallas Mavericks. So that's really what I'm seeing from this series. And I think it's going to be entertaining. Luka's always a fun watch. I just don't think that everybody else around him has enough juice. And I agree, Cole. The Mavericks are definitely going to make some changes this upcoming offseason. And I'll be very curious to see what they do. Kevin, you have any other thoughts to add on the series?
I would just say there's one big X factor. I'm going to give you 2 words, Nate. Playoff P.
Oh, my God. Are we done crapping on Paul George yet?
I will be done if he shows up. If he doesn't show up, then we'll have a conversation in 2 weeks about how once again, he's not looking good in the playoff.
What
I
if
hope he does
shows
show
up? What if he shows up but the Clippers don't make the finals?
If he
Or what
actually,
plays
if
well?
he shows up, then I'm fine, right?
All right.
But I think
Alright.
he was one of the main reasons they didn't make the finals last year, because he just was not good. And I know that you love
Paul
him,
George
but-
played like a top 10 player in the NBA this year.
Well, yeah, but it
especially
doesn't matter in
given-
the regular season.
I know. But I think this year more than ever than in years past, he stepped up, not only just being a scorer and an open threat from three, running off screens, getting involved in the catch and shoot game, but he's really taken an initiative. Not that he's never been able to set guys up and act as a playmaker or like this primary offensive initiator before, but he really took a lot of that on his back this season, especially before they got Rondo. And I think a lot of that's also going to carry over into the playoffs as well. And that now you don't look quite as bad from the point guard spot as you did a few months ago. Now you have Rondo to be able to come in. Playoff Rondo always excels. You have Paul George willing to make a lot more of those plays. Kawhi Leonard, I think Zach Lowe's talked about this the past few years now, and Kevin O'Connor, but he's really stepped up in terms of his passing ability as well. So as long as they keep that ball moving and the ball doesn't stick in anybody's hands, in particular one of those two wings for too long, they don't get isolation happy like they did against Denver last year in the postseason. That was their biggest downfall. They lost to the Nuggets because they stopped moving the ball. So as long as that doesn't happen, the Clippers could very well go to the finals. Hell, they could end up winning the finals. They're that good of a team.
If Paul George plays like a top 10 player in the NBA, they make the finals, right? They almost have to, because the only team that could probably stop them in a 7-game series is Phoenix. I think a gelling Paul George and Kawhi beats Denver without Jamal Murray.
Either the Lakers or Phoenix. I probably wouldn't take the Clippers over either of those two teams, but it's not like the Clippers couldn't win a series against either of those two teams. They are that capable of a team, and I don't know. I think Paul George is going to come out and have a dynamite playoffs. I think his head's in the right spot. I think he's good mentally, and his game, like I said, it took a few different steps up this year from even where it was, and he was already an All-NBA caliber wing when he's at his best. So I'm rooting for you, Paul George. I hope you prove everybody wrong. I hope you have a dynamite playoffs. You come out, you show everybody what you're made of. So, but that being said, though, that's going to do it for this episode. Again, we're probably not bringing any groundbreaking insight into the playoff picture in this first round. As Cole and I know, we're a draft podcast first and foremost. We spend so much of the year scouting and watching a lot of the young guys. We catch NBA games whenever we can, but that's not quite as often as we'd like to, as some of these other shows and methods of getting content out here that you're probably more accustomed to for NBA coverage. But there's no guys to scout live right now. It's playoff time. We're probably going to get better and better with our NBA takes as the playoffs go along, as we're able to watch more basketball. So definitely stay tuned to the podcast feed, not just for the draft content as we're moving through that whole pre-draft process, but for the NBA talk and the insight as well. I'm excited more than ever for these playoff runs, and the playoffs are a really good opportunity to see different trends emerging in the league and using those trends to judge how some of these younger players are able to benefit as they step into new roles coming into the NBA, how they're going to be able to contribute, etc. So it always comes back to scouting. We're always able to kind of bring everything around full circle and make use of the information. So thank you everyone so much for listening. You can, again, follow us on Twitter @DraftDeeper, subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. Enjoy the playoffs. We'll be back for another Dynamite Draft show, same time usual next week. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody.